Have you ever wondered which horror classics were left out of the 1982 film? There is a wealth of uncut moments that fans were never supposed to see hidden below the terrifying alien mayhem. Everything might have been different with these removed scenes, which would have added complexity, terrifying scenes, and unexpected turns. They unveil a mysterious side of the movie, from stressful character moments to extra monster mayhem. Why did they end up on the floor of the cutting room? Perhaps the studios had different plans, or perhaps they wanted to keep the horror tight. In any case, exploring these missing moments is similar to discovering a hidden map that leads to the nightmare's center. Are you prepared to investigate the mysteries that lie beyond the last cut? Camera, lights, delete. The Thing, a 1982 horror film directed by John Carpenter, is one of those that people still discuss years later. It has a spooky atmosphere, fantastic practical effects, and a gripping plot that captivates you with its mystery and dread. However, many people are unaware that the film contains deleted portions that were hardly intended for public viewing. Because they reveal aspects of the plot and characters that could have fundamentally altered the film's mood, these cut sequences have generated a great deal of discussion and controversy. The omission of these scenes raises questions about why and if the film would have been better or worse if they had been included. These removed scenes disrupt the rhythm and intensity that Carpenter masterfully achieved in the final cut, which is one of the main reasons they cause controversy. The film's success can be attributed to its ability to maintain tension and tension. However, the removed video frequently includes more dialogue and further information about the characters' pasts and the extraterrestrial entity. That may seem like a good thing at first, but fans frequently claim that the fact that you don't really know anything about the creature is part of what makes it so terrifying. The mystery vanishes and the film loses some of its eerie atmosphere when those cut sequences reveal too much about it. Additionally, the removed sequences alter our perception of the characters. The main factor contributing to the overall paranoid atmosphere in the rendition that we are all familiar with is the cast's sense of insecurity. However, in a few of the cut sequences, the characters express emotions or speak more freely, which contrasts with the tense, frozen-out tone of the remainder of the film. Although it seems good to get to know them better, it also lessens the sense that anyone could be the monster or turn on the others at any time. This has sparked discussions regarding whether or not giving the characters more personality enhances the intense atmosphere of the story. Then there is the renownedly ambiguous and open ending. You're left wondering about the fate of the survivors and the true significance of the entire situation as the film comes to a close. In an attempt to provide a little more clarity, some of the deleted scenes feature lengthier concluding moments or different endings. Many fans and critics believe it's better when things remain unclear, even though some people might like that kind of resolution. The purpose of the enigmatic finish is to keep you wondering and contemplating survival in a dangerous environment and trust. Because they provide too many answers, those chopped endings seem to lessen the impact of the movie. From a backstage perspective, the deleted scenes further demonstrate how difficult the film's production was. Time constraints, budgetary restrictions, and ensuring the film didn't drag were all issues that Carpenter and his team had to cope with. Longer creature transformations and intricate special effects are included in some of the trimmed footage, which may have been too costly or simply slowed down the film's pacing. This illustrates how difficult it is to strike a balance between a compelling tale and practical filmmaking issues. It also demonstrates how what is left out of a film is just as important as what is included. The fact that these deleted scenes were concealed for such a long time adds even more intrigue to the whole situation. Before they began to appear on limited edition DVDs or online fan collections, fans were unable to see them for years. There were many new discussions when people eventually saw what had been eliminated. Some believe that in order for us to see the entire picture, these scenes ought to be included in an extended cut. Others claim that because it maintains the suspense and mystery, the original film is ideal just the way it is. It sort of demonstrates how much consideration goes into determining what makes a film function best that these scenes were not intended to be viewed. In actuality, several sequences from the original script for The Thing were trimmed in post-production because they slowed down the action and detracted from the suspense. What impact did it have on the whole movie? Last cut. John Carpenter, the director, acknowledged that his own directing decisions were also to blame. Some scenes were repetitive or simply didn't contribute much. Due to financial constraints, the idea of having the dogs participate in a snowmobile pursuit was abandoned. Carpenter changed the original script to include a new monologue for MacReady. In addition to highlighting MacReady as the camp's reluctant hero, he aimed to clarify matters for the audience. He believed that Bill Lancaster, the scriptwriter, paid insufficient attention to individual characters and instead concentrated on group dynamics. The jump scare method of Halloween was being imitated by horror films at the time, and Carpenter sought to steer clear of this with The Thing. He therefore omitted a few cliched scenes that were overdone, such as a body showing up at the Norwegian camp out of the blue. The majority of the 3 minutes of character backstory that they filmed from Lancaster's script was not included in the final cut. MacReady watched Norwegian tapes and inflated a blow-up doll in one strange sequence that didn't make the cut. Later, Knowles and that same doll appeared in a jump scare. A few character deaths were also altered. For instance, in the finished movie, Fuchs is discovered burned. In another rendition, however, he was depicted with a shovel through him and nailed to a wall. Knowles had a really unusual finale in which he returned half-changed as a monster with tentacles. However, in the film, he essentially vanishes. Additionally, Carpenter struggled to depict what it looked like to be assimilated by the creature. Lancaster's initial plan for Benning's demise was for an extremely sophisticated series of hydraulics, dogs, and fire to drag him beneath the ice before gradually transforming him into the creature. Far too costly. Instead, they filmed a more straightforward version in which Bennings is attacked off-screen, though it's unclear exactly how it all works. Actor Peter Maloney, who played Bennings, was covered with fake monster parts, orange dye, and KY jelly to depict a partial transformation. Gloves from another creature design were also utilized. In fact, Carpenter filmed many endings. One was more cheerful. MacReady is saved, and a blood test reveals that he is not afflicted. Carpenter detested the brighter version, claiming it was corny, while editor Todd Ramsey believed the original conclusion was too depressing and wouldn't sit well with test audiences. In a different version, Childs was completely omitted, allowing MacReady to imply closure and eliminate any remaining uncertainty. The studio preferred that one even though it tested marginally better. Because they believed it best suited the movie, Carpenter, the producers, and executive Helena Hacker chose to maintain the original ambiguous ending. Carpenter consented to include a scream to indicate that the object had been destroyed during the outpost explosion. Not everyone was content, though. Sidney Sheinberg, a Universal executive, pushed for a more heroic conclusion with soaring music because he didn't like how gloomy it was. Later, Carpenter claimed that neither version of the conclusion was favorably received by viewers, indicating that they were simply looking for something more conventionally heroic in terms of cinema and creatives. Storyboards were heavily worked on by artists Mike Ploeg and Mentor Hubner prior to filming. Many of the movie's closing images ended up looking almost exactly like their sketches because they were so detailed. Because it allowed them to showcase the expansive surroundings while maintaining a tight, cramped sense, cinematographer Dean Cundy lobbied for the use of anamorphic widescreen. By implying that something might be hiding just out of frame, the additional space surrounding the characters also contributed to the development of tension. Filming began in 1981 in a snow-covered, mountainous location close to Juneau, Alaska. You can picture the landscape, with miles of unspoiled snow, rugged cliffs, and angular peaks in the distance. For around 3 months, shooting continued. In an uncommon and costly approach at the time, director John Carpenter, who was always involved, insisted that the actors practice for 2 weeks before the filming began in order to acquire a sense of how the sequences would unfold. Following Alaska, the shoot was relocated to the Universal lot in California, where temperatures were well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. However, in order to maintain the frigid setting of the story, they had to keep everything extremely cold inside the sound stages. To keep the set looking appropriately cold and frosty, the crew employed a ton of portable air conditioners to shut off the stage and supplied moisture using humidifiers and misters because they couldn't find a refrigerated area large enough to accommodate the sets. Carpenter thought there were too many scenes in the film where characters were just standing around talking after seeing an early rough cut. Fans were spared the dull bits because of him. What took their place? He changed several of the inside shots to be shot outside in order to add some variety. When production relocated to Stewart, British Columbia, a rural site with breathtaking scenery and reasonable access discovered by a location scout, these would be filmed on location. About 100 crew members from the US and Canada arrived in Stewart on December 2, 1981, to begin the next stage of filming. Due to snow-covered roads, Their bus almost went off a 500-foot precipice on the way there. A portion of the crew remained at the nearby mining community. Others were housed on Portland Canal vessels. The outpost sets had already been constructed at the filming location, which was technically still in Alaska, and they would travel 27 miles each day along a winding road to get there. In the hopes that snow might fall in time for filming, those sets had been erected on rocky terrain with a view of a glacier throughout the summer. The interiors could not be heated above freezing because they were utilized for both indoor and outdoor situations. Snow would melt off the roofs otherwise. The camera lenses would practically freeze and shatter because it became that cold. The only way to keep the equipment cold enough to function is to leave it outside. The lenses fogged up and required hours to clear if they brought it indoors. There were frequent delays due to bad weather. They simply couldn't film on certain days. That portion of the shoot took 3 weeks to complete. It took 8 hours to rig the outpost set for the movie's big conclusion. Actor Keith David, meanwhile, suffered a broken hand in a car accident just before his sequences were shot. Carpenter sent him to the hospital, where surgeons implanted 2 pins, but he still showed up the following day. When he returned, they covered his surgical gloved hand with a black glove that had been painted to match the color of his skin. If you pay close attention, you won't see much of his left hand during the first part of the film. Later, they used the already burned American facility as a stand-in to film the sequences at the Norwegian camp. Some of the camera crew had to hide within the set with the explosives when it was time to blow everything up, then run to safety before the big boom. They simultaneously used 7 cameras to record the explosion. The players had to rely heavily on their imagination because there were not many sophisticated visual effects in use at the time. What their characters were intended to view would be explained by Carpenter. Usually it was only a wall or a mark on the ground, but occasionally they had puppets to react to. Since they didn't use any real-world locales, art director John J. Lloyd was in charge of designing and building every set. In order to make the sets feel more claustrophobic and lived in, Cundy also came up with the concept to add ceilings and exposed pipes to make them more genuine and small. Of course. Decades later, the iconic horror film The Thing from 1982 continues to frighten people. Let's investigate why this generation continues to discuss it. Fantastic but terrible. It is one of those movies that has gained cult status not only because of its eerie plot but also because of its powerful atmosphere and incredible special effects. The film, which was directed by the renowned horror and science fiction filmmaker John Carpenter, is a true standout in the genre. The film is based on John W. Campbell Jr.'s story Who Goes There, which has this iconic sci-fi twist about paranoia and alien invasion. The film's ability to precisely portray the sense of total loneliness in a freezing waste country with a creature who can mimic anyone is what makes it so unforgettable. From beginning to end, the tension is evident. The way it creates suspense is among its best features. It is based on this slow-burning worry of not knowing who to trust, not on cheesy scare tactics. As people begin acting strangely and disappearing, the characters, who are stranded at an Antarctic research outpost, gradually come to the realization that something is seriously off. This feeling of paranoia is so skillfully rendered that it almost becomes a character in the movie. Because anyone could be the Thing in disguise, the paranoia makes every interaction uneasy. Even now, they still look fantastic and hideous, and the physical effects are quite revolutionary for their time. It adds a degree of physical horror that is rarely equaled, and the alien creature's mutations and transformations are both terrifying and fascinating. There is a genuine sense of something strange and terrifying when you see those effects in action. The cast and their performances are another factor contributing to the show's popularity. Kurt Russell's portrayal of McCready, the tough yet astute lead attempting to decipher the situation, is flawless. The group's believable chemistry serves to anchor the science fiction elements in reality. Every scene has a growing sense of stress and desperation. You care about who lives and who doesn't because the characters are developed so effectively, which is crucial in a horror film like this one. In addition, the film's eerie and melancholy soundtrack greatly heightens the mood. The soundtrack, which was produced by Ennio Morricone, a well-known composer of westerns, is eerily appropriate for the remote, freezing location and heightens the sense of dread. The film is still remarkably strong even though it was released in the early 1980s. Because viewers at the time weren't sure what to think of it, it wasn't a big hit when it initially came out. However, it has gained recognition throughout time as one of the greatest horror films. For the details and the craftsmanship, it's one of those movies that people return to again and time again. Beyond merely being a monster movie, the film also poses intriguing queries of trust and identity. It makes viewers consider how we identify one another and what occurs when those lines get hazy. Because of its renowned ambiguity, the conclusion has generated countless discussions and theories among fans. It's the ideal method to keep viewers on edge long after the credits have rolled. The Thing is the only film that perfectly conveys that special blend of loneliness, mistrust, and sheer dread. Why the plot was so good. An interesting tale. A Norwegian chopper is pursuing a sled dog in Antarctica in the direction of an American research facility. The passenger unintentionally blows himself and the helicopter up, as the Americans see. The pilot shouts and fires a gun, but the Americans are unable to comprehend him. Gary, the station commander, defends himself by shooting the pilot. Dr. Copper and American chopper pilot R.J. McCready go to the Norwegian base to look into it. They transport the charred remains of an odd humanoid back to their station after discovering it among the frozen corpses and burned wreckage. Blair, their biologist, conducts an autopsy and discovers that the creature's organs are typical of humans. After Clark tends to the sled dog, it quickly changes and takes in a number of the station's dogs. Childs is alarmed and burns the thing with a flamethrower. According to Blair's autopsy, this dog thing is an entity that can precisely mimic other living forms. The Americans follow information from the Norwegian facility to a sizable excavation site that includes a partially buried alien spacecraft that Norris believes has been buried for more than 100,000 years, as well as a smaller dig site that is the size of a human. After performing a computer simulation that implies the creature may absorb all life on Earth in a few years, Blair starts to get concerned. To reduce the risk, the team takes preventative measures. Bennings becomes infected by the humanoid's remnants, but Windows steps in and McCready destroys Bennings' corpse before it can fully integrate. In order to stop anyone from leaving, Blair sabotages the station by burning cars, killing the last sled dogs, and cutting all communications. He is detained by the crew in a tool shed. They discover that the blood reserves have been destroyed, but Copper recommends testing everyone's blood for infection by comparing it to clean samples. McCready assumes over after losing faith in Gary's ability to lead. When McCready, Windows, and Knowles discover Fuchs's charred body, they conclude he killed himself to evade absorption. Knowles leaves McCready in a snowstorm while returning from their investigation of his shack, believing that he has contracted an infection after discovering ripped clothing inside. McCready uses dynamite to break in while the team is debating whether to allow him to return. It looks like Norris is having a heart attack. However, Norris' chest turns into a mouth and chews off Copper's arms as Copper tries to resuscitate him, killing him. The Norris object is burned by McCready, but its head separates and tries to flee before it is destroyed. According to McCready's theory, every component of the organism is a separate living form. He suggests putting everyone under rest and using a heated wire to test their blood. After using a scalpel to assault McCready, Clark is slain. Palmer's blood responds dramatically to heat, while everyone else passes the test. Palmer emerges as a thing, escapes, contaminates Windows, and McCready burns them both. While the others check on Blair, Childs remains on guard. They discover that he has fled and constructed a miniature flying saucer out of car pieces, which they demolish. When they return, the station's power generator is wrecked, leaving them without heat, and Childs is gone. McCready believes the animal plans to hibernate until a rescue crew arrives. Knowles, Gary, and McCready concur. It cannot be permitted to live and detonate explosives to demolish the station. Knowles vanishes and Gary gets killed by the Blair thing. The detonator is destroyed when it changes into a gigantic monstrosity. However, McCready uses dynamite to set off the explosives, destroying both the creature and the station. Childs returns, saying he got lost in the storm while chasing Blair, while McCready sits beside the flaming wreckage. The two men acknowledge the awful futility of their circumstances as they share a bottle of scotch, exhausted in Chile. The main idea. Fundamentally, the work examines themes of distrust and paranoia. The movie looks at how trust breaks down in a small group when people start to worry that someone, even a close friend, might be hiding as an enemy. The picture, which is set against the backdrop of Cold War tensions, recalls worries of nuclear annihilation and mutual devastation. When McCready destroys a chess machine after losing and then swears to get rid of it even if it means losing the entire team, it is clear that he prefers destruction to defeat, according to Daniel Clarkson Fisher of Diabolique. The crew's paranoia and fear of assimilation are interpreted by both Fisher and Michael Edward Taylor of Screen Rant as parallels for the American Red Scare of the 1950s through 1960s. Additionally, Taylor links the movie to the egocentric isolationism of the me generation of the 1970s. According to Slant Magazine's John Linkson, the men's eccentricities and rejection of social conventions reflect their post-Vietnam disenchantment and anti-establishment mindset. The Atlantic's Noah Berlatsky notes the lack of women and suggests that the object represents anxieties related to homosexuality and masculinity. Vice's Patrick Marlborough refers to the movie as a satire of masculinity, contending that the men's emotional immaturity stifles the vulnerability and empathy needed to recognize the creature. In particular, McCready avoids making friends and turns into the most paranoid person, which helps him survive but keeps him and the kids in mutual distrust in the uncertain ending. Oren Gray of Strange Horizons and Kyle Anderson of Nerdist analyze the movie from the perspective of H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic terror. Anderson uses Blair's metamorphosis to show how Lovecraft's xenophobic themes are connected to the fear of being overcome by an unknown force. He compares McCready, who portrays the more conventional hero, to Blair. Gray highlights the monster as a metaphor for self-loss, contending that the disintegration of personal identity rather than worldwide devastation is the true horror. It doesn't talk or explain itself. It merely mimics and endures. Den of Geek authors Mark Harrison and Ryan Lambie observe that the item, frequently without the host's knowledge, takes away free will, which is what makes mankind unique. In a 1982 interview, filmmaker John Carpenter referred to the movie as pro-human rather than pro-science. He clarified that it's preferable to be human rather than be supplanted by an emotionless, purposeless imitator. Additionally, some draw comparisons between the blood test sequence in the movie with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which was then developing and only detectable by blood testing. Numerous hypotheses have been raised by the film's confusing ending, which leaves McCready and Childs by themselves in the cold. Using tiny visual cues such as the lack of eyelight or discernible breath, some contend that Childs is infected. Others blame these on the limits of the recording. At one point, Carpenter thought about infecting McCready, however, in a different version, he was saved and tested as not infected. However, McCready actor Kurt Russell maintains that focusing on hints is pointless. He said the film's conclusion is designed to leave audiences feeling unsettled. Nobody is certain of their identity or whom they can rely on. By saying he knows who the item is but won't say, Carpenter has increased the mystery. Critics criticized the film's grim tone, anti-authoritarian themes, and gory special effects when it was first released, giving it mostly poor reviews. Rotten Tomatoes. Some referred to it as the ultimate 1980s dumb film, immediate garbage, and a miserable excess. In contrast to the positive tone of E.T., the comeback of Star Trek II, the visual polish of Tron, and the integrity of Blade Runner, Alan Spencer of Starlog called it a cold and sterile horror movie that felt like a cash grab. A lot of critics thought the effects overshadowed the plot and made it boring. According to Linda Gross of the Los Angeles Times, the movie lacks emotional depth and is nihilistic, making the character deaths seem pointless. The film's speed, continuity, and lack of human touch were all critiqued by Spencer. Dave Core of the Chicago Reader described the conversation as uninteresting and the characters as interchangeable, while David Anson of Newsweek said the effects were more important than the tension and drama. David Denby was among those who expressed disappointment that the movie did not examine what it was like to be dominated by an extraterrestrial. Beyond its graphics, Roger Ebert thought it was unimaginative but frightening. And the New York Times' Vincent Canby wrote it was only fun for horrific effects lovers. Although some commentators praised the performances, they frequently criticized the characters themselves. They were poorly written caricatures intended to be eradicated, as Ebert and Spencer pointed out. Kurt Russell was hailed as a strong lead by Time's Richard Schickel, who thought the other characters lacked depth. A lack of sexual attraction and camaraderie, as well as unrealistic conduct such characters splitting up without cause, were also noted in some reviews as lowering emotional commitment. Both praise and criticism were given to the movie's special effects. Many praised Rob Bottin's work as imaginative and scary, while others thought the gore was overdone and even vulgar, despite their technical mastery. The creature was dubbed the most hated monster in film history by Cinefantique, which also hailed it as the best special effects production in 10 years. According to critics like Denby and Schickel, the film's gory imagery overshadowed its poor narrative and undeveloped characters. However, Canby thought the effects were too phony to be genuinely unsettling. Several technical aspects were commended, such as the editing, sound design, cinematography by Dean Cundey, and the score by Ennio Morricone. However, a number of reviewers faulted Carpenter's direction, with Spencer saying that he lacked the subtlety required for science fiction and bowed too much to audience expectations. The movie, according to Anson, indulged in shock for its own sake. It was often negatively compared to other science fiction and horror movies, such as Alien, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978, and The Thing from Another World, 1951. Some people thought it heavily referenced these earlier pieces without being as good as them. Others, like Variety, even thought the 1951 version was better. Members of the crew and actors from the last movie also didn't like it. Actor Kenneth Tobey criticized the excessive effects for overshadowing character development, while director Christian Naibu compared it to a violent commercial for J&B Scotch. According to a review in Phil Hardy's science fiction book, 1984 was a shocking flop and Carpenter's weakest work, with an excessive reliance on spectacle and a lack of compelling storyline. Actor Richard Clennon observed that, in contrast to Alien, which spent time to develop its ensemble, the absence of character introductory moments hampered audience involvement. The prevailing opinion was summed up by John Nubbin in an article published in Different Worlds magazine. Although there were some scary moments in the movie, its failure to really captivate the audience made it seem like simply another horror picture. This video has been shown to you. If you haven't seen the movie yet, do so now. We'll see you at the next one.